Today we're talking about one of the best accessories for the Red Komodo, and that is right here, the Outrigger handle by Red. Something to note about the Red Komodo, in fact, all Red cameras and most cinema cameras in general, is that they don't have in-body stabilization. Now, something that you can do to help stabilize your footage is obviously use something like a gimbal or a Steadicam, or maybe some of your lenses actually have stabilization built into the lens itself. But in comparison to a lot of DSLR cameras that have in-body stabilization, such as the GH5 has incredible in-body stabilization, a lot of these cinema cameras and the Red Komodo do not have this capability. This is something that I wasn't quite sure about initially when I first was looking at the Red Komodo. On their site, they have a section that kind of talks a little bit about stabilization, so I was a little confused at first as to whether there is in-body stabilization that was included in the brain, but there, as a matter of fact, there is not. What they were showing on the website was simply showing that because you're shooting with that 6K sensor and have that extra resolution, a plugin such as Warp Stabilizer in Premiere, any other sort of stabilization in post-production is going to work a lot better on your footage when it's shot in 6K versus something that's in 4K or 1080 or 2K. And so that is something to note about this camera, is that stabilizing in post is going to be a lot easier with this footage. But it's not going to be perfect. As always, if you've ever used a stabilization software in post-production, it doesn't always work the best. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's just what you need, but sometimes you are really trying to make something work and Warp Stabilizer is turning your footage to jello and it's not going to work. Which is where having your footage a little bit more stable in production can really be helpful. And again, like I said earlier, you can use a gimbal or stabilizer, but what happens if you want to shoot handheld? And that's where something like this Red Outrigger handle is going to come in really, really useful. Now, there are some competing products on the market for this camera, especially from Tilta and Small Rig. They have some full cages that you can buy specifically fit for this camera. And in addition to that, you can get handles that fit those cages. Those are great value for the price. They are definitely on the cheaper end in comparison to this handle right here. This handle comes in around $500 USD. In comparison, I know that you can find some of those alternatives more around that, $150 to, $250, $300 range. And so you're definitely saving a lot of money going that route. And so why would you opt for something like this that's just more expensive? So a few reasons for it. The first I want to talk about is that there is a record button that's actually built into this handle. One of the issues that I found with the Red Komodo is if you look right over here, so here is normally where the record button is. It's the least convenient place for a record button that I think I've ever seen on a camera, but I do get it. When you're building this thing out, this camera is not meant to be a camera that's, run and gun in the sense of like with a DSLR where you just have a hand on it, you can control all the settings, with one hand, your aperture and your shutter speed, ISO, and your record button is all kind of in the same place. With something like this, that's more of a cinema camera, that's not going to be the case. That's not how it's going to be used. And so I get like no one's really going to be using the record button on the body itself with something like this. So I don't think it really matters where they put that button, to be honest, especially because of something like this handle. Or if you have a monitor, you'll probably just be pressing record from that itself. But I did find that having this handle, it just makes shooting a lot more enjoyable because, you find your shot, you frame it up, and you don't have to, take your hand off the camera to go press record, then put it back, make sure that you fine tune your shot, get locked in again. No, instead you can just make sure that you have that shot ready, you press record, and you're rolling on a shot that's already what you want it to be. And it's very good for if you're going a little more fast paced as well, very, very helpful in that instance. It's just a lot easier and better to use having this record button right here. The grip of this handle is amazing. Honestly, like the way that the finger grips go and everything, the kind of rubber finish on it, it is just way, way better to hold than some of these kind of wooden or plastic alternatives that I've seen on the market. And that honestly goes a long way. Maybe not when you're, initially holding the camera just for a few seconds or minutes trying it out, then maybe it doesn't make the biggest difference. But one of the biggest reasons that I went for this handle in particular is that a little bit before I got this camera, I had actually been shooting some handheld stuff on the GH5 with a rig or a cage setup with that, and one of those wooden grip handles there. And I did not like the experience at all of using that handle. One, just the shape of it didn't feel very conducive to actually holding it for a long period of time. I felt like any time that I was holding the camera by my side and kind of let my arm drop and I was just holding the camera regularly, I wasn't actually shooting with it, I felt like just the angle of it, I felt like I was gonna drop it. Just the grip wasn't very good on the camera. And when I'm dealing with, you know, basically a $10,000, you know, setup with the Red Komodo, the last thing I want to do is drop the camera. I guess that's what insurance is for, but I would rather just not have to deal with that in the first place. I like to protect my gear, keep it safe. And so with a camera that expensive, why would you cheap out on a handle that, you know, may lead to incidents in the future? I would rather just have something that is safe and that I know I have a good grip on, that I'm making sure that, you know, it's not gonna slip out of my hand, anything like that if I'm moving quickly. And so I think that in and of itself is a very, very huge reason to go something like this that is just a little bit higher build quality, something that actually, you know, fits your hand a lot nicer. You have a really solid grip on it. And it also helps with stabilizing your images, making sure that you have a handle that is comfortable, that you have a good grip on. It's gonna make that footage even more stable. And lastly too, the nice thing is that you can actually pivot this handle. So if I undo this, you know, I can adjust where this handle goes. So it doesn't really matter where I put it. I can always find a spot that works for me depending on what I'm shooting or what have you. And that's been a really big help too. That's something that I noticed again when I was using that other cage and handle, is that it was just locked in one position. And I think that was one of the small rig handles where it's the cage and then just has that wooden handle. There's no pivot on it. Like you can't adjust what angle your grip is coming from. And I found this really, really annoying. I just found that it was not exactly where my hand would naturally fall. I'd always have to kind of like twist my wrist a little bit. And when you're shooting, you know, 8-10 hours, that becomes very frustrating and very uncomfortable. And so I think that is something that is definitely worth extra money. If this is something that you do full time, if you're gonna be using this camera handheld a lot, it's worth spending the extra money to get something that is actually going to work for you, that you're not gonna be kicking yourself for buying down the road. And especially the fact that it just talks to the camera. This is just an integrated system. It's something that, you know, it works flawlessly. I've had zero issues with it as far as, you know, the record button actually functioning or anything like that. And so I would recommend going with something that's actually in that Red ecosystem because it just works together. And that's, I think, something that I'm a big fan of, is when companies just are able to have gear talk to each other. It just works. The last thing that I want is, you know, weird issue or bug coming up in the middle of a shoot that costs you time, it costs you money, and it's just a headache. And so I would just rather, and I prefer having gear that just functions the way that it's supposed to function, and I don't have any liabilities that way. It just is much more of an enjoyable experience. It's less risk on my part as far as taking it on a shoot. And at the end of the day, I think that's what matters most to me. If you're someone that only cares about price, and that's the bottom line, you just want the cheapest product available, then the stuff by Small Rig or Tilta, those are going to be incredible systems for you. And this whole video is not me, you know, crapping on those companies. They make amazing, amazing products, and there's, you know, gear of theirs that I'm getting. You know, for instance, the mount that will attach to my monitor when that comes in. They make amazing products, and I highly, highly endorse what they do make. However, for this system, I have just found, and I think I would prefer having this Red handle as part of this package versus something that they offer. That is one of the downsides to using this handle though, is that if you do want to purchase one of those Small Rig or Tilta cages for your body, this is not going to fit properly if you're trying to attach both. So you kind of have to pick one or the other, which is a little bit of a downside, but for me, it was worth having that control for the record button and just having a higher quality handle than actually being able to have that cage. Because in reality, anything else that I would add on top of that cage would basically just be serving the same function as this handle itself. And then obviously the monitor or a top handle or anything, I can mount directly on top of this handle itself. And so for me, this ticked all the boxes that I personally needed. But again, everyone's so different. That's one of the beauties of this camera is you can build it out however you want. There is so much customization. And so no matter who you are, what you're using it for, there probably is going to be a solution out there for you. This just happens to be the solution for me. One last thing to note when it comes to trying to get, somewhat stabilized handheld shots is it really does come down to weight. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of DSLR cameras have in-body stabilization, is because they're not very heavy, and so you need it. You need to compensate for a lot of those little micro jitters that you get in your footage that look really unpleasing. Normally when it comes to handheld shots, you do want movement. You do want the camera to be moving. It needs to feel handheld, but what you're trying to get rid of is those little tiny micro jitters. And that's primarily what you get from lighter setups. And so on top of this handle, one of the best things that I know I'm gonna do, and you could do for your setup as well, is just to add weight. So for me, that's gonna look like, adding a monitor on top. I have the Indy 7 coming in the mail from Small HD. Maybe it's adding a matte box, or, replacing these BP batteries with a V-mount plate and a V-mount battery. There's different ways you can add weight. Typically, the best range is 20 to 25 pounds. If you can get your camera weighing in that range, that's gonna, I found, produce the best results for your handheld footage. It is, about having grips and correct positioning and all of that on the camera as well, as far as how you hold it. But a lot of it does come down to weight. It's very hard to get micro jitters on a camera that weighs a solid amount of weight, just because it's harder to move. It's harder for, the little vibrations in your hand and all of that to actually, move that camera fast enough to get those micro jitters. And so you usually just get that nice kind of handheld flowy motion when you have a built-out camera like that. And so that's definitely going to be my plan with this rig. Obviously, we're just starting with this Outrigger handle. Again, like I said, I have the Indy 7 in the mail. I'll be doing a review on that as well. And, maybe I'll be getting a matte box or something like that. Maybe I'll be, changing out to V-mount batteries. We'll see. It'll kind of be touch and go here with this as I have more and more experience using this camera firsthand. But that is the bottom line, is I do know that I want to add a little bit more weight to this camera. I do like how compact it is. I don't want to sacrifice that too much. That's one of the reasons why this camera is so appealing, is the form factor of it. So you don't necessarily want to ruin that, but there are ways to add weight without making it too big. And so that's my plan, is just going to make it a little bit heavier without, compromising size too much. Just to show the difference that this handle or a handle like this can make on your footage, let's just go ahead and play some side-by-sides. One with just the body itself, just holding it normally, and then one with using the Outrigger handle. And let's just take a look at some of those differences in those, micro jitters and just the general handheld movement of it. And you can kind of judge for yourself the difference that it makes. That is all that I have for you. If you found something helpful from this video, or if you have some feedback from me or anyone watching, go ahead and leave a comment. I would love to hear your perspective on, any alternatives that you've found, or if you have the, the Outrigger handle, and if you're loving it, if you're not liking it, what are some things that you like and don't like about it? Would love to hear from you. If you did like this video, go ahead and give it a like, subscribe to this channel. That just helps me to know that you want to see more content like this, and I will go ahead and see you in the next video.